Okay, thanks for joining us for today's Idea Lab. Idea Labs are hosted by Libraries for Digital Equity. Libraries for Digital Equity, or Libraries for, numeric for, libraries4de.org, is a free resource and community gathering place, listserv, and training, all kinds of training materials for libraries, for anyone that is working to close the digital divide. I'm Liz Gabidis. I get to host today. So today's topic is library managed public Wi-Fi networks. Let's go ahead and get into it. So I want to start with where we are right now, what we're already seeing, at least as kind of large trends in libraries. So first off, we're seeing our on-premises services. That means things like obviously Wi-Fi networks inside the building. So that's pretty straightforward. We've been doing that for a long time. Then there's also things like Wi-Fi in the parking lots. And maybe that seems like, old hat, but it is something that for a lot of libraries was new at the start of COVID. In fact, I remember that was one of the very first projects that I did right at the start of the pandemic was helping libraries to add outdoor access points, Wi-Fi access points in their parking lots. And maybe it's because of concerns over, security or not wanting to have people parked in the middle of the night that they hadn't provided those services in the past. Now it's really familiar to us. But, it's still a stepping stone. It's still a step to what could come next. There's other places like, say, bookmobile stops or remote pickup lockers, kind of like Amazon pickup lockers, but for your library holds. You could also have, kiosks, spots where people can. The intention is for them to access library services. Maybe it's as simple as like a rack of books in the grocery store. A 5 foot by 5 foot area where kids can go get free picture books. That's a library space, that little space. And so, there's potential that you could provide Wi-Fi services right there and say that it's on-premises services. So then we get into the off-premises services. And so that means, first off, hotspots. I know that that's old hat by now, but that is providing internet service in a location that's not the library. There's also other civic buildings. Maybe the courthouse nearby doesn't have Wi-Fi. In fact, actually, I heard this story. There was this person who shows up at the courthouse. They have their hearing scheduled. They're all ready for it. They had ridden a bus for like an hour to get there. So they go in, they show up, and then they find out that their hearing is virtual. No one's there in the courthouse for their hearing, and there's no one who can help them. So they're an hour away from home. They don't have a device. They don't have any connectivity, and they're about to miss their hearing, even though they put so much effort into being there and showing up on time. And the building, because the courthouse, because they're concerned about security, they didn't have a Wi-Fi network. So even if the patron had had a device, they wouldn't have been able to get on the internet. And, I understand that maybe you're concerned about proprietary, systems or that your network, it needs to be networked between certain devices in the courthouse, and for security, you can't share that with the public. Okay. But there is a potential for the library there. So, in that particular instance, the library was able to say, okay, here, hurry, across the street, come to the library. We're gonna, we'll get you set up. Here's a study room. Here's a laptop. Here's how to get on Zoom. So the individual was able to attend their hearing. But from then, from that point, then the library was able to work with the courthouse and say, okay, we need a better solution here. So what does this look like? Can we manage a Wi-Fi network? Because we know how to do this. It can be separate from your network. It can be sequestered. Anyway, so we're talking about other civic buildings. We're also talking about public places like gathering places, parks, pavilions, plazas, malls, like anywhere where people are going to be together and they might need connectivity, something that's better than cellular networks, cellular connectivity. Maybe kids are getting together in nice weather, and it would be great if they were able to um, do their homework at the pavilion at the park, or if a teacher for a community center class was able to join by Zoom or stream their class maybe to people who couldn't come in person. There's a lot of reasons you might want to have Wi-Fi in these public places, and libraries have the expertise to offer that network securely and safely and reliably because, we've been doing it for a long time. We know how to do this in our building, how to keep our network safe. So why not, do it in these other places? I think these are all wins, honestly. Like I think this whole list that these are wins. But I do want to talk about, some other ideas. Like, there's some experiments, some emerging experiments, ideas that I think are new. And, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not. It depends on your library. So one is partner premises. I remember hearing about a library that was offering Wi-Fi through a shelter. And at first it was, outside Wi-Fi network outside the shelter. And then for security reasons, they ended up providing Wi-Fi inside the shelter as well because people needed connectivity and they needed not to be visible from the road. Maybe it means, a local, like an early literacy center that partners with the library and they need better, networking inside the building. So there is the possibility to share the library's network. You can, piggyback off of existing infrastructure, or you could use, well, actually, we'll get into that in a second. Home internet. This is a new one, and I think this is interesting. So it's most common in areas where say the area is very economically distressed. There's a large apartment building that doesn't have a good network running to it. Maybe there's a very predatory contract between the building owner, or maybe between a previous building owner, so that there is network infrastructure in place for one very outdated network with one provider that has no interest in updating the equipment. So that's really limiting the connectivity options that all of the residents in this building have, unless the building owner wants to go try and get someone else to come in and wire the whole building. Maybe that's just not going to happen. So that does allow for the opportunity for the library to bounce its network to this building and provide it wirelessly to the residents there, especially if they're low income and likely eligible for government support and subsidies for specifically internet. This does get more complicated with both E-rate and with the former Affordable Connectivity Program now ended, but it does bring up the idea of fixed wireless networks. This is what I started talking about a second ago with partner premises, how you can bounce that network, that library network, further out and share it with another location. So the idea is basically you've got a hardwired network that's coming into the library. Then there in the building, you're going to put an antenna on top of the building, and then that antenna will bounce the signal wirelessly to another location. And that location can then, install a modem and a router and put out that Wi-Fi network to everyone in the, immediate area. And you can also use multiple antennas, and so you can cover a very wide area this way. Uh, a unique opportunity that's available to libraries is that these fixed wireless networks for libraries can operate in a special band that is not available to other people. So the Citizens Band Radio Service, CBRS, is a specific, bandwidth, like a width of frequencies that regular people can use to transmit data. But there's another, section called EBS, Educational Band Service, I think. And that portion is available to libraries. It's just freely available. And so if you wanted to operate a wireless network, since you are a library, you can do that with that special band of services. That's a great opportunity, and it gives you some real capacity for, expanding that network, getting it out there wider. Okay, one other thing to mention here, municipal broadband networks. So that is when the municipality owns the network, like with other utilities. Say it's like a sewer service. So the city owns probably the infrastructure, and they manage they resell the services to their residents, and they might contract with someone, maybe for maintaining the infrastructure, maintaining the network, or maybe they contract for the billing process. But the idea is they own this utility and they, sell the services back to their residents at a reasonable rate. And I think the real benefit here is that the municipality doesn't have the necessity to make money off of this. They're just trying to be stable, to make the same amount that the service costs to offer. And so that allows them to really do right by their customers and by their residents. So what's interesting, municipal broadband networks are not news. That's been around for a while. What's interesting is that libraries are just starting to get involved. And I think it'll be really interesting to see this evolution, as libraries get more involved in projects like this, in local broadband networks to see, what does that evolution look like as libraries get closer to being an internet service provider, at least in some instances. What, new opportunities does it bring, but also what liabilities come up. Let's get into that, liabilities. So first off is E-rate implications. So E-rate is a federal cost-sharing mechanism that reduces the amount that schools and libraries pay for their internet service. For some libraries, this is hugely necessary, especially if you are in an area of high poverty, then the percentage that the government pays is very large. Or if you are in, say, a very rural or hard to reach area where that infrastructure build out and that service delivery cost is very, very high, this can make a huge difference to your budget. The problem is there's a lot of restrictions on what E-rate can cover. It's only really supposed to cover library patrons, and it's only really supposed to cover the environment of the library. And so some big questions are, what's the library environment? We can define like a book pickup locker as a book annex, and then it's eligible for E-rate. But what about these other spots? What about a library partnership at a daycare center, like we've been talking about? Is that eligible for E-rate? And if not, then you start getting into cost allocations. It's not a deal breaker for any of these projects, but it's something to consider. Another piece here is SIPA compliance. This is the Children's Internet Protection Act. It's been around since the 90s, I think, and it mandates that anyone under 18 that's online, that they are blocked from viewing obscenities. And so this requirement for content filtering on end user devices that are provided, so this applies to schools and libraries, end user devices that are provided to students or to kids in a library, that has some liability if we're not following that on our broader networks or broader provision of services. There are also lots of state regulations that are going to affect this. Maybe your state has stricter rules, or maybe your state goes the opposite direction and says, don't deny any service to minors. And, then that could change how you're offering these services, what kind of like identity verification you need to do, say. Maybe you need users to check a box that they're over 18. Maybe you need to show your internet acceptable use policy before anyone can get on your network. What are your options if you are offering this in a different location, besides the library's physical building? How can you help people understand their responsibilities and their rights as a library patron on your network if they don't, if they're not in a library? One consideration that I think is a big opportunity for libraries is privacy, accessibility. I think this is a chance for us to, kind of remind our patrons, like, hey, the internet doesn't have to be terrible. Like, this is what it could look like if your internet service provider, treats you with respect and has no interest in spying on you, and has no interest in, selling a large portion of your traffic for ads or, at a higher rate to a different user. This is what it looks like for your internet to be actually accessible, for your network to be accessible to everyone in your community. I mean, we really have a chance to set an example, I think. Okay, another thing to consider is the more a library gets close to that role of internet service provider, the more we are vulnerable to, legislative swings. Things like, for a brief moment there, we had net neutrality, and then some interesting legislative and judicial things have been happening recently that means that net neutrality isn't necessarily impacting our work. I mean, it isn't necessarily impacting how internet service is provided. COSA is another one. I think it's the Kids Online Safety Act. This is something currently going through Congress. Now, it's not going to, pass tomorrow or anything, but it's important because it shows us what some decision makers' priorities are as far as online information. And unfortunately, I have to say, the intent behind this act is great. Let's protect our kids online. Unfortunately, the specifics in it could be very destructive. They are absolutely biased against the LGBT community, against queer youth who, desperately need information online. It prevents a lot of health information being accessible to kids, and it also it severely limits how much information retrieval, information finding kids can do without their parent or guardian knowing. And so a lot of kids in, pretty unfortunate circumstances lose their right to access information, in this kind of legislation. And again, we don't know, what's going to happen here. This isn't necessarily something impacting internet service now, but if the library is an internet service provider, these kinds of legislative swings could happen at any time, and they could majorly impact the way the library provides services and our that balance between our responsibility to provide equitable access to all of our patrons and our legal liability to comply with rules and restrictions set forth by the government. It's a tricky spot. So the question here, like what's worth trying, what's worth experimenting, and what's worth saying, oh, actually, you know what, that does not look like what a library should be doing. I mean, my answer is usually like everything's worth trying. It's worth giving it a shot, but it's really going to be up to you and up to your library. I would love to get into a little bit of a discussion here and talk about, what you're already trying and what you are, what you're hoping to get into in the future. Okay, thanks for attending today. It's been great having you. And you can check out our website, librariesforde.org, to register for future trainings, to see other past recordings of trainings, and we'll hope to see you again in the future.